to another great edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, Editor-at-Large at Mississippi Today. Thanks for joining us. And by the way, if you haven't checked out our great coverage, it is at MississippiToday.org. We have all kinds of good stories, and we've had a ton of coverage since the pandemic started on all kinds of great information to help you keep you and your family safe. So today's guest is along those lines, an incredibly talented doctor from TrustCare. It's Dr. Catherine P. Phillippi, who joined TrustCare in 2021. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology from Mississippi College in 1994 and her medical degree from the University of Mississippi School of Medicine in 1999. Dr. Phillippi completed her pediatric training at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences at Arkansas Children's Hospital. And prior to joining TrustCare, she practiced at Children's Medical Group in Jackson, Mississippi, and spent time in Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome back home. She's married to Dr. Mark Phillippi, has 3 kids, which means that you guys have been basically bouncing, being on call probably for their whole lives, trying to figure out, okay, how are the kids going to get fed tonight? So
most definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I've got several friends that are doctors that are married, and it's always the, oh no, the kids are home alone tonight. So it's very good. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So I guess probably the first question, we got a lot of things to cover. The FDA and the CDC now both have given the green light for children ages 5 through 11 to be able to get doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And I'm going to want you to break down some of the details, and I'm going to ask you some questions about that. But the main thing is, number one, how are you holding up? Because it has been 2 years of been very busy because on top of that, the kids are still getting all the other things that they get sick of. I know RSV has been a big problem in the last few months. And of course, there's the usual maladies that kids have. Having 3 kids of my own, I know how that works. So are you holding up all right?
I'm holding up fairly well. We definitely, the last surge was difficult. We have had employee turnover and difficulty retaining nurses because of the demands on the job, and that nurses can go out of state and be paid 4 times what they make here. So luckily I have an awesome skeleton crew that has stuck with me from the beginning, and they are tired, but they're awesome and they love their job, and that makes my job easier.
Oh, that's good to know. I mean, like I said, I'm going to go speak to a group of doctors at another medical institution here soon. And the title of it is How to Learn to Laugh When Everything's Driving You Crazy, kind of thing. And I know that probably humor has played a big part in keeping y'all going.
Most definitely.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, like I said, I know the Delta variant, and it was really weird because a lot of people were still operating on the original Alpha variant and the original Wuhan variant that came, the very initial one, where kids didn't really get sick from this virus. Right. And this time around, they did get sick. And it was just, it was kind of, my wife teaches elementary school, so I got a little bit of her take on what she was seeing as well. Is that what y'all saw? Y'all saw the Delta?
Most definitely. The first 2 waves, definitely we did a lot of COVID testing. A lot of that was contact tracing and asymptomatic positives. The few that did have upper respiratory symptoms or GI symptoms were relatively mild. And you might have 3 children in a family, one of which was symptomatic. The other 2 would also test positive and be completely asymptomatic. Oh, wow. So, the acuity of the visit was more about education, contact information, how to prevent spread. And then it went from those type of visits to the asthmatic that is very sick, and oxygen level had already dropped by the time they got here.
Wow.
So, a much more rapid onset from testing positive to being very sick. Whereas with the old variants, you might have 2 or 3 weeks of symptoms before you got real sick. And then also just secondary infections, multiple visits for one positive case, which of course eats up your clinic rooms and time. And takes you away from patients that have routine infections and normal things.
Yeah, I was I guess I've done enough reading on it, and I mean, I never went to medical school. I'm a cartoonist. I draw pictures. But from what I understand about the Delta variant is you have a much higher viral load, and it gets up in the nasal cavity. That's why it's affecting. Because my 18-year-old had COVID, even though he had been vaccinated. He had a breakthrough case, but he'd been in a situation where he probably got a huge snoot full of virus. And is that the reason why it seems to be affecting kids a little bit more? Is just because it's got a higher viral load, or did the actual virus
I
itself
think
change?
the virus itself was also different.
Yeah.
I feel like the viral load for me, I mean, this is medicine according to Kathy Phillippi,
Yeah.
but I do think your inoculation dose of virus, and by that I mean if you walked past someone in the hall, you both had masks on, they coughed when they passed you, and a few viral particles entered the air, you may breathe a few. You might even test positive and you might get sick, and this is totally according to me, but with me swabbing noses all day long, despite wearing PPE in children who don't cooperate, who cry and scream and cough in your face,
Yeah.
I had 2 doses of vaccine and did get COVID that was significant. I didn't have to be hospitalized, but I did have symptoms.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that was related to how many inoculations and how, all day long, I'm in a clinic full of COVID. So
Right.
I'm thankful for the vaccine because I know I would have had a tougher time with it had I not had the vaccine.
Yeah. I mean, you're quite a bit younger than I am, but you're not too far off from me. And we're getting at that age now where our immune systems are probably not quite as sharp as what they used to be. And
Sure.
that kind of goes into my question, I guess we'll talk about with kids. And when you're talking the new guidelines on it, and I was kind of surprised about this a little bit, but 5 to 11, so that's before puberty, the dosage isn't the same amount as the adult dosage, is it?
It's 1/3 the dose.
Yeah.
And, I feel like people misunderstand immune systems on
Right.
a regular basis. I'm questioned by parents all the time about just routine vaccines and the fear of vaccination. And I like to speak in stories that make sense to people who didn't go to medical school,
Yeah.
because that helped me. Before I went to medical school, I knew nothing about the human body or why sicknesses worked the way they did or how they worked. So what I like to tell people is, the idea that your immunizations are too much for the immune system is insulting to the miraculous creation of the human body, because on a cellular level, we know that a cell can do millions of things at one time.
Yeah.
And that's beyond what I can even comprehend. So I understand people's fear, but I always tell them your child's body encounters more things that it has to deal with on an immunity level with one trip to the grocery store. Even when you cover the cart with a little cover and wipe their hands down, even when you're careful, than it does in all the immunizations I give throughout a child's life. It can do literally millions of things at one time. So I feel like with the child's immune system, if you think about it, the kids who normally get sicker from illnesses are the very young, the very old, and the immune suppressed. And what we know about COVID is now that is true. Although there was a study that recently showed that kids that have secondary problems from COVID, meaning like the MIS-C, multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, actually between 5 and 17, there was a bigger incidence than below 5. So I have some newborns that got COVID that actually did really well. And actually after Delta, I hospitalized 2 10-year-olds with MIS-C. So, that is unusual. I think everything about COVID is unusual. It doesn't fit the mold. That's made it hard for us as practitioners, because it sounds like we're giving advice that is not congruent. One day you say this and 2 weeks later you're saying that, but we're learning as we go. We're getting more information, and just like with any evolving plan, you have to troubleshoot and make adjustments. COVID has kept us on our toes with that for sure. But a child's immune system, they have proven with this vaccine, is robust in its response. So why would you give 3 times more if it mounts a really good response to 3 times less? So anyway, so that's why the difference in the dosing. They mount a very robust response to a lower dose, a third of the dose that adults get.
Yeah, and I had seen that, like for instance, because 12 to, I guess until infinity, you're taking that bigger dose, but that's after puberty and your immune system changes a little bit. And the bottom line is, though, if you have an 11-year-old that is maybe 90 pounds or one that's 50 pounds, it doesn't matter. It's more age that matters on the dosage than on weight, right?
Absolutely. And I find it frustrating. Sometimes people will move to my practice from out of state, and they got their immunizations one day before they turn 1 year old. Well, guess what? They have to be re-given. It's just, we have to have arbitrary lines in the sand so that there is some rule. And sometimes it seems silly, but you just can't dissect and make exceptions for every different scenario, because obviously there are lots of different scenarios. So yes, I think I've been asked the question, what if you turned 12 during the time, like you get the original younger dose and then you turn 12, right? You would just get a bigger dose. I don't think I would not spend, there's so much to think about right now. I would not spend 1 second thinking about that. I would just do what is appropriate the very day that you get it. I've had people ask, would you delay the dose because they're about to turn 12? I think that depends. If you're in a high-risk situation, which school is, I would just want the dose that's available that day.
Right.
And I wouldn't overthink it. So anyway, that's my assessment.
Yeah, no, you just nailed the next question I was going to ask. Because like I said, if somebody's, and I've talked to a lot of parents that are very relieved, and that are thinking, okay, now finally, because they were having to be very careful because they didn't want to give their child COVID,
Sure.
And so they were masking up still and doing the things, trying to avoid social situations. So what your recommendation is to go ahead and get it now, even if you're 11 and a half, say.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, definitely on that. Of course, you get your first dose, you got to wait 3 weeks for the second dose, and then you got to wait 2 weeks for it to be fully. So we got the holiday season coming up. If you're going to go ahead and do a dose on it, it would make sense to do it sooner than later, right?
Absolutely. I think that the family gatherings that we've suffered not being able to have matter a lot to children. And I think as much as we can be normal, we should. But I think it's kind of like people that are skeptical of the vaccine. I always say, did you buckle your seatbelt on the way here today? Yeah. And I will say, did buckling your seatbelt prevent you from being in an accident? It did not, but it is an attempt to save your life in an accident. And it doesn't keep you from having an accident, just like the COVID vaccine is not going to prevent you from ever having COVID, but it's going to save your life, hopefully. And as well as that, not take up a hospital bed or an emergency room, so that the trauma, the rollover motor vehicle accident, can get the care as quickly as it needs.
Yeah, that's what was so scary during Delta, when we were having the tent cities being built and the parking garages at UMMC, and it was like, I literally knew people that had heart attacks and had to sit in the hall. It was that deal. So I saw a report this morning from Texas where they said that they were talking about the difference between the number of patients they had that were unvaccinated versus vaccinated, and it was like, you're 40 times less likely to be hospitalized and die if you've had the vaccine. Right. I like those odds.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like, I would never want to stand over my child in the ICU and make a decision about removal of life support,
Yeah.
having not used a tool that was in my toolbox available to me. I feel like even people, my husband does nephrology. So a lot of people, a lot of patients that have severe COVID that end up on life support, end up on dialysis.
Yeah.
And so he had end of life conversations all day long
Oh,
throughout COVID.
wow.
And, not choosing not to dialyze is an option of removal of care.
Yeah.
So death from not being able to breathe looks very different than death from renal failure or kidney failure.
Yeah.
And so he had those conversations, daily, and he would come home and just explain to me how sad the family members of the 30-year-old guy who is in relatively good shape, who just didn't want the vaccine and was vehement about that. Air hunger makes people change their mind.
Yeah.
It is not a pleasant way to be sick or to die. And so I feel like story after story after story have come through my husband and to me through the practice of medicine that just make me so much more so much less fearful of any side effect. It just pales in comparison to the risk of COVID.
The only side effect I had was I had a very sore arm for a couple days, or for about a day, and I was very tired the next day. I was very fortunate. My wife had a headache for about a week from it, but other than that, when our son ends up with his breakthrough case, and he was kind of sick for about 3 days, and he popped out of it, but none of the rest of the people in the house had it. I was like, okay,
Right.
I'll take that. And
Right.
I think you touched on something earlier about, because we're still learning about this virus, and I mean it. I've got a friend who has long COVID, that he has brain fog. He's got all kinds of, he's got some other issues. It took him. He still hasn't got his taste and his smell back, but it's causing some real neurological issues too. I just somehow think that the risk is, I'd rather not have it or have a very mild case of it than to risk having those long-term issues.
Definitely. And I think we are seeing kids that I believe have long-term COVID. And just like with anything, people expect kids to be resilient, and they usually are. But
Yeah.
I think there's a significant percentage of kids who may not can articulate what they're feeling, but who would qualify for long COVID. And I think often, in light of the fact that we came out of the pandemic with, isolation socially, and our rules about screen time had to go in the garbage can because
Yeah.
we had to use screens.
Right.
We have this population of kids that are suffering from mental health issues, and it's hard to tell, what is caused by not getting COVID, but living in a world full of COVID, and how much is a consequence of having a positive COVID test or infection. So that is scary. I feel like there's a lot that we'll find out probably later down the road that makes us realize how important prevention is,
Right.
and how dying on the hill of not wearing a mask because it's your right, or dying on the hill of I'm going to choose not to vaccinate because I don't believe science, or I don't believe politicians are feeding me the right information, is going to pale in comparison to what we look at from, it's hindsight is 2020. You have to, you have to plan for the future, and then you have to learn from the past. So
I think it's been obviously very difficult, and I see it on my Facebook page. I see the response to cartoons when I'm doing, which seems to be, would be pretty normal response to a pandemic, hey, take care of yourself, wash your hands, do the basic public health things. But like I said, it's gotten to be very political on this whole thing. The one area where it seems that people will listen, they're not going to listen to me, but they will listen to their doctor. And I know you've been in the game. You've been a pediatrician for a while, and you've developed relationships with your patients. And what kind of questions are you getting from the parents who, obviously they're worried about their kids and they want the best for their children.
Sure.
And what kind of questions are you getting?
I think that unfortunately, we live in an information society where you can get all types of information
Yeah,
bombarded with what look like facts,
right.
and it's very hard to discern what is real and what is not. So
Yeah,
I think mostly people come with this, well, this paper says this, and the newspaper said that, and the TV said this, and my friend said that, and a doctor I met at the swimming pool said this, and that she wouldn't give it to her kids. And you get all of these tidbits, and you just feel so overwhelmed that it's like paralysis by analysis. You just
yeah,
decide not to do anything. And that's super unfortunate, because I have served in third world countries and have connections to those organizations, and they are desperate for vaccine. I mean, they are absolutely desperate for vaccine and don't have the luxury of all the information. They just know that COVID has killed people in their village, and there is no medical care or oxygen, so they want the vaccine. And that simplifies things. So for us, I feel like I try to really look upon that as with a heart of compassion, because my goal is to take care of families and to help navigate difficult times. And I'm called to live in this time with this pandemic, with these issues, and I'm trying to do that well. It is tiring, because if I spend 45 minutes talking to a family about the COVID vaccine and they end up not getting it, it's hard not to walk out of there feeling like you lost, and you're 45 minutes behind for your next patient, so you're staying here longer. And I know those things are super necessary. So balancing that and trying to psych myself up to have that conversation one more time, hoping that the trust relationship will prevail. I think what probably wins more people than any other thing I can say is that I gave it to my children without hesitation.
yeah,
Because why would I give my child something that I was fearful of?
right.
And I do have a child, my middle child is immune suppressed and also has hypertension.
Oh,
And
wow.
so she is not obese, but she has, two issues that would make her a really poor candidate for doing well with COVID. And she has actually had 3 doses of vaccine. And, when I explained to them from my perspective of being a parent of a child that was immune suppressed and how that looked
Hmm.
in my life, and being transparent about that fear helps them understand, because the reason they're asking me questions is because they're fearful.
Right.
And the studies that were initially done on messenger RNA technology started in the 80s, where
Right.
researchers wanted to create a vaccine for HIV. So even though this particular vaccine for COVID is new, the technology has been being refined for decades.
Mhm.
And we drew on all of that to create this technology that works. So I'm not afraid of it. I don't, and I gave it to my kids without hesitation.
That you're right, because there was so much discussion about how this is, we're being experimented on. This is new technology and everything else. And you touch on the mRNA technology has been around for a long time, and there was a lot of research done on the SARS-1 virus when it came out in the early 2000s, and then of course it kind of went away on that. This virus, like you said, even though it's related to the to MERS and to SARS and to some of the other coronavirus things, this one seems to be taking on a little bit different path and a little. When we've been getting these variants, do you think that some people say, well, it's over, the numbers are down, it's over? I don't think we're over yet on it. I didn't know what you've been seeing. Do you think we'll get another wave down the road? I mean, we've got Christmas coming up, potential variant.
I'm fearful. I do think that there are things about this vaccine that we don't understand, that the best experts that have all of the data still
Yeah.
have given us good ideas, and most of which have been true, but the exactness of a prediction has not played out like other diseases.
Yeah.
And so that makes me fearful. I do think we're in a lull right now. I definitely still am having some positives, but much less. But I think whenever we have a big surge and you start seeing the hospitals fill up, people start to congregate less, wear their masks more, be more careful, not have the spend the night party. And there's, and people are sick, they're on quarantine or whatever. So it kind of shuts things down a little. So there's this natural ebb and flow. I do think that I'm holding out. I hope that it just miraculously leaves. I say that almost every day. I'm ready for it to just be gone, but I'm going to do everything in my power to be conscientious, to try to be a good steward of the tools that are given me. It's kind of like the guy, you're a cartoonist, that's standing on the roof and, the flood is water's coming up and he's saying, God, please send something. A boat comes by and he doesn't go. The helicopter comes and he gets to heaven and God says, well, I sent you a boat and a helicopter. What did you want? So I think it's kind of like that. I think we have to use the tools we have, even though they may be imperfect.
Yeah, does it ever frustrate you to see that basically we're all behaving now like it's nothing, that it's not?
Yes.
Like, yeah, I figure, because I mean, y'all have been at the receiving end of, when there is a wave, everybody else runs around, acts like it's normal, and then you're working 18 hours a day, trying
Yes.
to keep up with
And
everything.
I do think, I have seen, my husband, like I said, deals with end of life, and that end of life becomes not important.
Yeah.
Like, that's minimized. I always tell people, even if the chance is 1 in 1,000, if you're the one, it's 100% of you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's devastating. And any child that has a death from COVID, even though the numbers are smaller than adults, any child that dies from this disease, if it were preventable, makes my heart heavy. I want to prevent any disease from affecting a child in any way. I always tell parents also, you might choose not to wear your seatbelt, but I bet you wouldn't drive your child around without a seatbelt on. So I just think prevention is the key.
How does this compare? Because a lot of people like to compare this to the flu, and we know obviously we've lost 750,000 Americans to it. It's worse than the flu, but flu is one of those things that normally kills very young, kills very old. 1918 was different because it killed people in the 25 to 29 range, which was completely different. But on this one, obviously this has been, it gets worse as you get older, but now with the Delta variant, it's affecting children more. Compare how it affects versus the flu on kids.
So definitely, with the flu, we definitely do see immune suppressed children, asthmatic children, people who have lung diseases do worse with the flu.
Right.
And that is true with COVID. But I have seen perfectly healthy, the 2 10-year-olds that I sent to the hospital with multi-system inflammatory syndrome were thin, healthy, active, run around, not sick very often. One of the ones that I sent had a bad flu-like cold that they didn't even come in for. And then 2 weeks later had 104 temp that lasted for 4 days and had, the lab work, that the rash, the diarrhea, and ended up by antibody testing proven that this was post-COVID syndrome, and ended up in the ICU. He was terribly sick, and he was a super healthy kid. Both of them were healthy. So I think that unpredictable nature of the virus makes me even more on high alert. It makes me more nervous. Like several people that have come in with fever after having had COVID in the past, like if you had the flu and then 2 weeks later you came in with fever and a cough, I would be thinking you had a secondary bacterial infection and you just needed antibiotics. I might do a blood count to confirm that, or an x-ray or something like that. But with this, the consequence of missing multi-system inflammatory syndrome and sending a child home, it is so just overtook me. And so I was doing all these elaborate labs on these fevers because, there's no cookbook, there's no place, a textbook for me to go and say, okay, this is exactly what you do in this situation. So definitely those 2 definitely ended up in the ICU and were very sick. But, I feel like if you actually practiced medicine and saw all the different scenarios, you would absolutely be 100% for prevention. And with the flu, I'm a prevention with that as well, but I've never felt this kind of fear in decision making with the flu. I fear the flu when it's at its worst, but I don't walk around always thinking about what the consequence of having the flu is going to do to you, which is very different. So,
yeah, I think that's one thing. I call it the Russian roulette virus because like I said, 5 chambers. You get a cold or you get the sniffles, and then the 6th one you end up in ICU. So you've got or whatever issues on it. But the problem I think where that causes is that suddenly everybody's seeing this virus through the lens of their own experience.
sure.
So either you've either not had it, or you might have had a light case, or even if you had a bad case of it, you weren't, you recovered. So you get on Facebook and you tell everybody, well, it's not a big deal. My Uncle Bob had the sniffles and I had the sniffles. And then because the fact that there's people in ICU that we're not obviously going to go see because we're not allowed in ICU and we're not allowed to visit your parents, it's almost like it's a slow motion hidden tragedy that we're not allowed to see. And I know that's probably frustrating because a lot of that causes people to, and it's like what I said earlier about the fact that people are like, well, it's not affecting kids, so why should I get my kids vaccinated? Well, it is affecting kids now, and it's not worth taking the risk, like you said, to not get them back. Yeah. So, I'll go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
No. You're much more interesting than I am. Trust me.
Well, I was just going to say, my husband, when the Delta wave hit, and I hate to keep talking for him, but I learned a lot from that. The population of, 20s, 30s, and 40s, he did not have anyone on dialysis that have received the vaccine.
Really?
And that's a huge statement. And he is, if you met my husband, he is not an alarmist. He is steady Eddie. I mean, obviously taking care of critically ill patients, you have to have a bit of that.
Yeah.
And for him to be fearful is a big deal to me. And he was coming home day after day with stories of super healthy people that, succumbed to this virus and, were saying the things that you were saying. My friend had it and he did fine. I'm healthy. I work out. I can run a marathon, whatever. And the reality is the virus doesn't care. Yeah. And the more aggressive it got, the less it cared. So I think prevention is really the only way we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, I was going to ask
manage it.
So say in a perfect situation where you had a high percentage rate of kids being vaccinated, do you feel like that would break and really honestly the population? And a lot of times you hear the opponents of the vaccine saying, well, it's being spread by people who's been vaccinated. That's one talking point. And the other is, well, you still get it. But like you said, if you do get it, you're most likely not going to end up in the hospital. So,
yes.
So do you feel like that if we could
there's no way to achieve herd immunity. You would lose too many people. That'd be like filling up a stadium of fans at an Ole Miss or State game and saying who's going to volunteer to be shot in the head. It's just not possible. So, I think that one of the misconceptions, and I'm not, a molecular biologist or an immunologist, but I know enough to know that, if you were to get a COVID infection, people will say, well, he's had COVID, so I don't need to get the vaccine. So natural infection is great. Yes, our bodies are amazing and they're great. Mm-hmm. But we recognize the particle that enters our body. And if COVID rapidly changes, you may have a positive antibody test, but that is not an indicator that it's going to recognize the next variant with the same robust response that it would recognize the exact same virus.
Yeah.
So I think people that get positive antibody tests are using that sometimes to believe that they're not going to get another infection. I have had children have 3 infections already throughout this pandemic. They've had it 3 times. Now you tell me how much that elevates your risk. for
Yeah.
long-term lung disease or myocarditis, all these things we're worried about. We don't know what's going to happen when they're 20 years down the road from 3 infections. And why would they get 3 infections where some people haven't gotten one? Those are questions that we can't answer, but I know that if we can vaccinate the majority of the population, we won't be in the same situation we've been in the past 2 years. It can only get better. And navigating how to manage this, if it does stick around, if it doesn't spontaneously disappear, we're going to have to manage it. And so I think trusting science, I don't trust politicians. I don't like being told what to do.
Right.
I don't like someone to manage me. I want to be the manager. I'm a control freak. But I also understand that despite all of what I believe are my rights and what I believe I understand to be true, whether it's for or against the vaccine, scientists do not sit in a lab and spend their entire life doing these research projects because they have an ulterior motive. I don't believe that. I know enough scientists and microbiologists and immunologists that I don't believe that they're this, narcissistic, crazy, money hungry person. I just don't. I think they genuinely want to figure out how to help the population at large, and I trust them.
One of the things I've read a couple articles. They're saying that other vaccinations are dropping right now because of the pandemic, and obviously some people not wanting to bring their kids, or there may become suspicions about other vaccines. I don't know, because of some of the disinformation that's being put out there. Are you seeing that right now? Are you seeing less? Yeah, that's scary.
We have a lot of patients that are scared to come in to the clinic at all. And, I do think that during the time that we were sheltering in place and people were not gathering, but now that we're gathering again and we're going to family gatherings, we're flying on airplanes, we're traveling, I think it is imperative that people get caught up. We're trying to make accommodations for that. But again, those catch-up vaccinations, in addition to all the normal sickness, makes for a really long day. But I'm adamant, like if someone comes in for a scraped knee or just something little and they're not up to date, we've been trying to catch everybody up as best we can.
Have you noticed the flu starting to come around right now?
We're starting to see, and I've heard that, and I haven't confirmed this, but several patients were with family members on the coast, and apparently there are more on the coast positives. So I definitely am giving the flu shot. I'm encouraging people who didn't get the flu shot ever before in their life. Now is not the time to get the flu.
Yeah.
Flu and COVID together do not make a good combination. And I do think if you catch the flu, your immune system is occupied with a significant infection, and it just makes you more vulnerable to the next thing. So
definitely. Of course, a lot of folks, the COVID shot's free, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. Free's good. Free's free on this. Is there any other advice you got? Oh, let me ask you before I get to that question. You and your husband both are doctors. You are in the sea of COVID every single day. You've got 3 children. You've got one that's immunocompromised. What are some of the things that you have done over the last 2 years to be able to keep your own family safe?
That's a great question. It is a great question. My job was obviously swabbing young people, and I took a leave of absence from work, and that turned into me taking a leave of absence from pediatrics.
Yeah.
My husband would come home from the ICU and undress in the garage down to his underwear and come through the house and get in the shower, and would not sit close to my daughter, which makes me tear up.
Yeah.
He didn't want to ride in the car with her. He any little scratchy throat, which you're tired and you're talking all day and you're dehydrated because you can't ungear to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So not feeling well is normal under that scenario, but always thinking, am I getting sick? Do I feel bad? I'm not sure. So, during the early phases of COVID, that was very difficult. I have never not worked since I was 14 years old. And the stint of not working several months was the largest time in my life that I have not worked. And I felt a huge responsibility to my patient population, but I knew I had to take one for the team and do what I needed to do to get my life in order at home and to make sure my kids were safe. Once TrustCare opened the option for me to come on board, the vaccine was starting to be given, and I felt more secure that they were going to take the severity of COVID very seriously. There was plenty of PPE at that time. We had a system in place where people check in and sit in the car. All of those things made it easy for me to go back and feel like I had more protection. So that's what we did. And over the year, and once we got our vaccines, we got less fearful. And my husband has still not had COVID. He has had 3 shots, and he is very, very pro PPE and tries to be super conscientious, but he has not had it. So
that's amazing.
And none of my 3 children have had it.
Well, that's even better. And I know you must have been incredibly relieved when they were able to get their vaccines.
Most definitely. My oldest is actually a student at Auburn. She's a sophomore, so she went to Auburn during the pandemic.
Okay,
and they actually,
she's in college and she hasn't had it. That's impressive.
No, and they had drive-through shots.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing to me how aggressively they pursued the students.
Yeah.
And I think that was a game changer for her. I mean, living in the dorm and trying to participate in any kind of activity, and she never got it. So that was great. That's
incredible. Any last advice that you would give parents right now? Just imagine I'm sitting here talking to you and I'm a parent and I have concerns about giving my 6-year-old the COVID vaccine. What would you tell them?
So I would say that of all of the things that I'm afraid of for your 6-year-old, COVID vaccine is so low on the list that it wouldn't even come into my mind. I think that it is, I tell people, a no-brainer. Like, if you spend all that mental energy worrying about doing something that scientists, not just in the United States, but all around the globe, never before have we been unified with other countries over an issue, and we are, even countries that are polar opposites than us. I think that there is no better thing that you can do for your child. I do not think the long-term risk needs to weigh on you. I think that the immediate risk of what we're facing should weigh heavier. And, I hope they'll even be able to approve it at a lower age. Although with the data showing that 5 to 17-year-olds do worse, you never know. But if we have a new wave with a new virus, we'll be faced with new problems. So I hope that everyone will trust and also just look at that it is not an American problem. It is not an American problem. And we get real caught up in what's going on in America and forget that there are people all over the globe that are doing the same thing we're doing. And I think the vaccine is super safe. I hope that people will reach out and at least have that conversation with a trusted physician. And I'm here if anyone needs me.
Excellent. You enjoying your time at TrustCare?
I love it. They're awesome. I absolutely love it. My clinic is so cute. You see the smart board behind me? They have one in every room and they can play games. We have an awesome staff. It's been great.
Good deal.
A real blessing.
Well, Catherine, I know how precious your time is, and you've spent a lot of time with me today and talking about this, but I wanted to say thank you. I think you put some good information out, and at the end of the day, that's who we need to hear from, is a doctor we can trust.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.